Super Mario 64 is just one of those games that so many of us grew up with. For many, it was the very first three-dimensional world they ever stepped in. On so many levels, this fun little kids game was a true pioneer that paved the way for countless titles that followed. And honestly, it hasn't aged poorly at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The platforming still feels incredibly tight, the controls remain fluid and dynamic, and the worlds still invite you to explore them over and over again. For me personally, Super Mario 64 holds a very special place in my heart, because it was the first video game I've ever played. We had a Nintendo 64 at home, even though the Wii U was already out at this time. But as a kid, you don't really know or care about console generations. Every now and then, usually on a Sunday, I was allowed to play for 30 minutes to an hour depending on the day. I don't remember every single detail from back then, but I do remember that my father and I eventually managed to unlock the upper floor of the castle. My dad always had a few more stars than I did, mostly because at that age some of those stars felt genuinely impossible to get. You either searched for a single star for hours on end, or you just couldn't pull off the movement because the game could be quite unforgiving in certain spots. Eventually, most of those stars remained a mystery to me, as I finally got a Wii U and forgot about Super Mario 64 for a long time. Years later, I finally dug out the Nintendo 64 again. For the first time, I collected all 120 stars, mainly because I now knew the game inside out thanks to YouTube videos. But while watching those videos, I discovered that there were actually modifications for the game. Specifically one where you could play online with others. To be honest, the online part didn't even interest me that much. My 7-year-old self was much more obsessed with the fact that you could play as different characters. I desperately wanted to play as Yoshi, who was and still is one of my absolute favorite characters. I tried to install Super Mario 64 online, but I failed miserably. Back then, I didn't even know how to handle a zip file, so I was completely lost. I've even asked my godfather for help since he knew way more about computers than I did, but in the end we couldn't get it to work and eventually gave up. As the years passed by and I grew up, the Super Mario 64 PC port finally arrived. A native PC port opens so many doors. Ultra smooth performance, infinite draw distance, and a ton of quality of life features through modding support. I wanted to experience this for myself, which eventually led me to SM64 Co-op DX. This version of the PC port comes with a built-in quality of life features and incredible modding support, making it super easy to host servers and play with friends. While the co-op aspect was cool, I found the mods themselves way more interesting. So I put together a custom mod pack to finally play through the game on PC. The most important part, of course, was finally modding Yoshi into the game, which is now a total breeze. My 70-year-old self would have been so happy knowing that only 10 years later I could finally run through the wonderful world of Mario 64 as Yoshi. I want to take a moment to go through the mods I used for this specific playthrough. First up is Brutal Bosses, which completely overhauls the boss fights and makes them significantly harder. The Bowser fights in particular are actually exciting now because they aren't just free throws and you're done. It also changes NPC interactions. For example, you have to fight the Toad on the upper floor to get his star, and the Penguin Baby is hidden in a completely different spot. It's not a perfect mod, as some bosses feel a bit unfair and some new puzzles are confusing, so I did have to deactivate it for a few specific stars. Next, I use Character Select, which gives you a nice UI to swap between custom characters without having to type the console commands. It just looks much cleaner. I also added Day and Night Cycle DX, which adds a dynamic rhythm to the world, which changes the visuals and even alters the music at night, which adds a great vibe, though it can occasionally be a bit distracting. To keep the momentum going, faster swimming was a must-have, ensuring that the water levels don't completely kill the flow of the game. For the movement, I installed the Quality of Life moveset. This adds a ground pound jump, the dive from Super Mario Odyssey, and an easier wall kick mechanic. It makes the gameplay feel just a bit smoother and more modern without overcomplicating things. I also tried Sunshine X Select, which changes the star selection screen to look more like Super Mario Sunshine, though it's a bit unpolished. To fill out the roster, extra characters added a whole bunch of heroes like Donkey Kong, Pauline and Peach, each with their own unique movesets. Donkey Kong has his signature roll, Pauline can throw her head like Super Mario Odyssey, and Yoshi, who I played as, has his iconic flutter jump. Finally, I used Swag Skeletons 95 replacements to give all the character models a more modern, polished look. Playing through the entire game with this setup was a blast. The biggest game changes were definitely playing as the new main character and the challenge of brutal bosses. Super Mario 64 is a masterpiece even without mods. The level design is just so well thought out, feeling both open and atmospheric at the same time. The vibe can shift instantly, like when you transition from a sunny field into an eerie atmosphere of Big Boo's haunt. If you're looking for an excuse to play through it again, I highly recommend checking out Super Mario 64 Co-op Deluxe for the high frame rates and widescreen support. And if you still haven't had enough after that, you can always dive into massive ROM hacks like Super Mario Star Road. This playthrough reminded me why I love this 30-year-old game so much. It still holds a solid spot on my top 15 games list at number 15. That might seem low to some, but considering how many incredible games exist, the fact that it's on that list at all after all this time says everything.